Okay.
So this morning, I watched a podcast, This Week in Startups, with Jason Calacanis, and his guest was Anthony Pompliano, and they were discussing Michael Saylor and Microstrategy, and there were really kind of two big points. Jason felt that Microstrategy might be a recipe for disaster because Saylor is just kind of a crazy man, and he's borrowing money to buy Bitcoin. So that was sort of point one. And point two was, why would someone own MicroStrategy when they could just own Bitcoin outright? And, MicroStrategy is priced 2 to 3 times higher than the Bitcoin that they have in their treasury. So at a certain point, that is going to potentially be a disaster. So I know you've been studying this whole MicroStrategy thing. What is your impression of it, and what do you think the risk profile looks like?
Okay, so I think you first of all have to look at it from different standpoints. Okay, so there's one audience, the main audience member for buying MicroStrategy are people who cannot buy Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
And who there's a whole bunch of people who can't buy Bitcoin or buy the Bitcoin ETF. Okay, I'll give you a couple examples. Yeah. So first of all, if you are in the UK, right, and you have your money in a pension fund.
Yep.
That pension fund cannot buy, by law, these ETFs. Okay.
In the United States, so they can't get to BlackRock, anything in the United States. All those ETFs.
No, they can't buy. They can buy the BlackRock Spider Fund.
Yeah.
Right. They can't buy They can't buy IBIT. Okay.
Now, why is that? Is it just because it's illegal in Britain?
Yeah. Look. I mean, the thing we keep on forgetting is that these things were not. You couldn't buy them in America a year ago.
Yeah.
Right. So these things started trading on January 11th. They are not trading. They're not open to the rest of the world, yet. So first of all, there's entire countries where you just can't buy them. There's the equivalent of the British version of the SEC. I think it's called the FCA. Mm-hmm. They don't want people trading these things or owning these things. Okay.
Okay.
Second of all, you have people in the U.S. who can buy MSTR in their 401k.
Yep.
But they can't buy the ETF again. So there's U.S. people who can't do it, right? Then you have other people like convertible bond buyers. They can buy convertible bonds, but they can't buy equities. Right?
So it's a charter issue. So you have two. So you basically have two issues. You have a jurisdictional issue where people in certain countries and certain jurisdictions cannot buy the Bitcoin ETFs that we have in the United States.
Right.
And then there's a charter issue where you have a fund which can only buy stocks or convertible notes, and that is your charter, and you can't you can't color outside those lines.
Right. And that's a huge, initially I didn't think that was going to be so huge, but it's actually pretty sizable. Right. So, it might be as big as half the market. Can't buy. Yeah. And on top of it, you have another part where you can do it. Like you're in the US, you could open a Charles Schwab account and do it. But unfortunately, you don't have a Schwab account. You have your money at Merrill Lynch. Okay. So now you have you could open another account, move all your money to Fidelity or Schwab, and then buy it there. But your money is at Merrill Lynch, or your money is at Vanguard, or your money is at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. And you now have, those particular banks, and they are banks, do not support that.
So it's a vendor issue. So that's the third issue.
That's the third issue, right? Yeah. So you have this vendor issue.
Yeah. So
let's just take, for those people, they're in a different kind of potential, different spot than you or me. Because if Bitcoin goes up 5x over the next 2 years, right?
Yep.
They don't really completely care if they're paying a little bit more right now for it.
For the premium.
They're going to make a lot, right? They're already bought into these people are already bought into the Bitcoin story. They love the Bitcoin story. They just can't participate in the Bitcoin story.
Right. So basically for them, the choice is because they can't get to the financial products in the United States for one reason or another, they want exposure to Bitcoin. They want to participate in what they believe will be a 5x or a 10x over the next 5 or 10 years.
Right.
The only vehicle available to them is MicroStrategy right now,
Right.
and it sucks because they get chopped in half or a third of what they would have made if they owned pure Bitcoin. But on the other hand, they get what's the remainder of the 5 or 10x up, which is better than zero.
That tells you one thing. Now, there's something else that's happening, which is because of the math of if the thing is persistently trading at, let's just say, a 3x multiple, right?
Yep.
Well,
the thing you mean MicroStrategy.
Right. MicroStrategy is trading at a 3x multiple and issues shares at a 3x multiple, right? Let's not even get into bonds right now, but just issues shares, right?
Yep.
And then buys Bitcoin with those shares, with the proceeds. Then, in fact, they are going to be accruing more Bitcoin per share on their balance sheet.
Okay.
It's very simple. Like, let's just say they're 3-1, right? And they do a big share issue, right?
Yep.
And now they're after the share issue. Let's just say the shares don't move, right? The shares don't move in price, okay? And the Bitcoin doesn't, just exactly where it is. Right after that share issue, right?
Yep.
It will now be 2.5 to 1, right?
Okay, so they'll start closing the gap, even if prices
so the gap kind of closes at even share price, okay?
Yep.
Okay, so the gap closes. So which is another way of putting it is there's a yield in Satoshi. It's sort of a Bitcoin yield. So if you look at the number there's 270 million MicroStrategy shares right now. They've issued more, right? So it was a smaller number. Yep. But there's, 170,000 Satoshis per share right now of Bitcoin in each MicroStrategy share. Okay. That number is going up. Okay.
Okay.
So there, that was started the year at 125,000. Now it's up to 170,000. So it's kind of it's growing into its valuation. You see what I'm saying?
Yes. Okay.
So in terms of a Bitcoin yield, this thing is now growing into its valuation. So a real simple way to think about this is, look, they started the year, they have 60% more Bitcoin per share than they did at the start of the year. Right now, 60% more. Well, if they can do 60% more Bitcoin per share in 1 year, and they keep on doing this for 2 years, we're going to get 1.6 times 1.6, which is 2.5, roughly, right?
Right. So they've closed the gap entirely.
They can close the gap as long as they can continue doing what they're doing for 2 years. They can close the current gap.
But to keep doing that, they have to keep issuing shares or borrowing money.
Yep.
Right. To do that. But you're saying if they just issue shares, that's enough. So
they have to do, the only way they get to the 60 number is they have to do a combination of bonds and shares.
Okay. So let's talk about the bonds.
Yeah.
So they're issuing convertible debt notes.
Yeah.
With I think 5 to 7 year maturity. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
About 5 years. About a little. Yeah. I think 3 to 5 years is.
It's 3 to 5. Okay, that could be.
Yeah.
Okay.
The longest dated ones I think are 2029. I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things
coming up. They're not coming up. They're not. None of those things are going to be due anytime soon. Right.
Right. So the soonest that any of those will be due is in 3 years, something like that.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So 2024 now. So 2027. Yeah. Okay. Maybe 2028 because we're almost at the end of 4 here. So,
I think there's some due in 2027. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, kind of the disaster scenario is that those convertible debt notes come due and they have to pay them back and the price of Bitcoin has crashed. What does sort of the worst case scenario look like in your mind as you're sort of play acting this thing? And is there sort of an exposure?
So there's almost no crash scenario because bear in mind, they've issued, I think, $6.5 billion worth of $7 billion worth of debt right now.
Yeah.
But they've got like $40 billion worth of Bitcoin.
Right. So they could just pay it off at any time if they wanted to right now, and have
but what I'm just saying
headroom.
is, they don't have a massive amount of debt relative to the amount of Bitcoin that they have today.
Yep.
Bitcoin doubles, which it probably will. It's going to be nothing, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to have any, and of that, only 10% is due in 2027. Like, they have no real problem right now, right?
Yeah.
There's no debt crisis problem. That's not a problem. And what they've done is they've laddered all their debt. So, it's coming at 2027, 28, 29, 30, So
yeah. So you feel pretty good about this. You don't look at this and go, "Oh my God, this is another FTX. This is another Luna."
absolutely not. No.
Waiting to happen.
I feel okay about it. On the other hand, the only thing I will say, and so that's you're looking at it from the downside now. The downside is MSTR is not going to go broke, in my opinion. Okay. Number two is I don't think they have a debt problem, right?
Yeah.
Could the gap close? Well, the gap could close if we have a bear market, right?
Yeah.
We have a big bear market. Market goes down 50%. Yeah, the gap will close. And you'll kind of have wished you just bought Bitcoin, right? You won't quite make it. You're still probably going to make some of it next year because unless the gap starts closing in a month, like if the business as usual continues for a year, you're going to have 60% more Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
It's not terrible, right? Like,
no,
like you might lose 30% relative to Bitcoin. But again, if Bitcoin goes up double, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, you only made 70% on your money as opposed to 100%. So people are like, that's a huge risk. It's not a risk, right? You would be so lucky, right?
Yeah.
Now, on the upside, you could see a scenario where that multiple goes up, right?
Yeah.
So it's very possible that multiple goes to 6 or 7 in a real frenzy, right?
Yeah.
Because if we get into a complete frenzy, like, okay, I'm sorry, we've just declared that America's passed a Bitcoin reserve bill, and we're going to buy 2 million Bitcoin over the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay, right?
Yeah.
And then I think everybody's like, how do I get exposure to this asset? Yeah. Now those guys are not going to be like, well, this is kind of a nice also. It's like, I need something. I'm going to buy Microstrategy at any price, right?
Yeah.
At any price. I don't care. And now Saylor can just sort of like say, you and you. And then
you can be selective. Yeah.
So my point is, I think he's got all the levers. I don't think there's going to be another MSTR clone that's going to be of any significance that's going to take anything away from his, he's got such a big thing right now. Nobody can catch up to him, right?
Yeah.
So there's no competition for what he's doing right now.
No meaningful competition.
No meaningful competition. I mean, it doesn't matter if somebody's like offering a product at 1.5 times because it just doesn't matter. Like it's not like everybody's going to go into Selmer Scientific, which is this little microcap stock. They won't.
Yeah.
They're going to, and the also thing is people trust Michael Saylor, right?
Yeah, they do. They do.
And so look, if you're investing in a stock, you're also investing in the CEO.
Yeah.
Some no-name thing, some random thing, you're like, I don't trust it. I don't think they're going to make the right decisions. They're not going to raise the money at the right time and everything else. So I think there's a lot of trust in what Saylor's built.
Well, let me ask you a question because it's the interesting point. The person, Michael Saylor, and MicroStrategy are tied together in the same way Elon Musk and Tesla are. Yeah. And one of the points actually Jason was making this morning on This Week in Startups was his view of Michael Saylor is that he's sort of like wild-eyed and crazy and like a prophet, like a madman, which he correctly, I think, also said, Steve Jobs is a madman like that. Travis Kalanick is a madman like that in a good way. Like that can produce a lot of good things.
Well,
but it can also
Steve
be
Jobs
disastrous.
said, the crazy ones, they're the ones who actually get stuff done. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what do you think of that characterization? Do you agree or disagree with it? What is your view on Michael Saylor himself, the person?
I mean, I think he's an absolute visionary, right? You
Yeah.
know, what I think he did is he realized he's the first CEO of a major company who realized, holy cow, if this thing happens, it's going to completely change everything, right? And I
Yeah.
think, look, obviously you and I were a lot earlier than Saylor, right, to
Yep.
Bitcoin, right?
We
But
were.
we didn't have $1 billion to invest in
Right.
Bitcoin either. Yeah.
Also
So
true.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also true.
So and we're not running publicly traded companies either, right?
Yeah.
So I think the fact that Michael Saylor, is in the position that he has and made and hit the aha moment, I think it's very, very powerful, right? And so I think I think really it's almost like not existential, but there's almost a fundamental issue of how do you measure things, right?
Yeah.
And Saylor is like me and probably like you too, measuring things in Bitcoin. Like
Yeah.
how much Bitcoin, what percentage of the world Bitcoin do I own, right?
Yes.
That's his metric, like he's like,
Not
I'm
gold,
at
not
2%.
dollars.
What?
I think this is the point you're making is not gold, not dollars,
Right.
Bitcoin and sats. You think, that's your core.
That's his unit of value is sats,
Yeah.
right? Now I think,
Yes.
Everybody else in the S&P 500 is thinking dollars. They're thinking dollars per share, earnings per share in dollars, right? Price to earnings in dollars, right?
Yep.
Now, but if you look at price to earnings in Bitcoin,
Yeah.
that's a very different metric, right? Because if you think about, let's just say you say, okay, great. How much is Microsoft earning in Bitcoin? Okay.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, they're earning this amount per dollar per share, and that's growing at this amount per. But then you go, the amount that they're earning in Bitcoin is actually going down in Bitcoin.
Right.
They're getting less and less Bitcoin, right?
Yep.
And the Bitcoin that they have $100 million right now, $100 billion, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. $100 billion, if they sold that today, they could buy pretty much Nakamoto's stake. They could buy $1 billion.
They could buy a stack. Yeah.
They could buy a stack, right? How much are they going to be able to buy 2 years from now?
Half the stack.
Half the stack.
It's
right?
going to be half. Yeah.
Which is called, by the way, he has a name for it. It's called one Nakamoto.
I didn't know that. That's
so they're currently valued at one Nakamoto, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to ooze down to half a Nakamoto or a quarter Nakamoto. Pretty soon.
Yes, they are.
Meanwhile, MicroStrategy is going to go to one Nakamoto.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So if you think about MicroStrategy, is the only company in the entire S&P 500 that's accreting in Bitcoin terms.
Yes. Hash Rate is sponsored by Ledger. With the announcement of Ledger Flex and Ledger Stacks, Ledger gives you the best security on the planet for your crypto and identity. Ledger Flex and Stacks drive an e-ink screen with the same secure chip that's in your credit card and passport. Except, instead of protecting the secrets of banks and governments, Ledger protects your secrets and your private keys. Ledger supports Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and more than 200 other tokens. The secure touchscreen, plus the Ledger Live app, means that whether you're buying your very first Bitcoin or doing your 2000th swap, you can do it securely and easily with your Ledger. And as always, use my link, shop.ledger.com/hashrate in the show notes to get the very best price whenever you buy a Ledger Flex or Stacks. When we're thinking about what Michael Saylor's doing, it's not really betting on a company in the same way that you would bet on a normal company like Microsoft or Uber. It's like betting. It's like a existential transformational bet on a new monetary system, on something that competes with the dollar or gold. And that's really the order of magnitude that we're talking about here. Is that correct?
Yeah. And look, I think it looks, in Saylor's view, and in my view, basically we're going towards this new monetary system probably pretty quickly too. I mean, pretty quickly meaning in a couple decades. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that the dollar is not going to exist, but it does mean that the main source of savings, the main source of capital, the numeraire, for effectively will probably be Bitcoin, right?
The numeraire. I like
The
that term.
numeraire, that's, that, and look, people, before gold, silver was there before gold, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at the history of the U.S., the dollar used to be represented as 350 grains of silver. That's what a dollar was, and it was the silver dollar, Remember those old things? I have some old Morton, some silver dollars.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. So anyway, so you had the silver dollar, and then we kind of, and actually it was right after the Civil War, which happened just after the gold rush, that they basically moved to gold. There's screw the silver. It's not very. We can't be shipping silver around. It's too heavy. We're going to move to gold. And so gold became the standard. Then it became fiat, and now it's becoming Bitcoin. So I think we're just in this phase of changing the units, and it has changing. The changing of the unit is a very, very significant thing. Because if we're moving to a thing where, the U.S. government can create as many units as they want, to a new world thing where the units are 21 million of them. That's it. So I think that's the new thing. And, as various people start to wrap their heads around what that means, I think everybody realizes they don't have enough Bitcoin. That's the problem. Most of this, the overall TradFi world has, the way I look at it, it has 0.1% exposure to Bitcoin. That's the number.
Wow.
Because if you think about it, there's well over $200 trillion worth of stocks and bonds, not even counting real estate. If you count real estate, you're getting to more like 500-600 trillion. And you've got 2 trillion worth of Bitcoin, but they don't actually own, which would be about, let's say, about 1%, right? But they don't own that Bitcoin.
Yeah,
the TradFi only owns the ETF and Microstrategy, so they only own about 10% of that Bitcoin. So they really have 0.1% exposure.
Yes, so it's very tiny.
Huge world with 0.1% exposure to the asset that's about to replace it.
Wow, that's an incredible way to think about it.
And if you start thinking it that way, it's like, what's the chance we get to, instead of 0.1%, 1%?
Yeah, well, pretty good. So that's a
100%, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you get to 1%, that means you're going to have, let's just call it $2 trillion that come into this asset class.
Yeah.
Well, you can't fit $2 trillion into a briefcase that is only $2 trillion.
Yeah, it's not a TARDIS. So it's going to squeeze.
It's going to squeeze it up to $20-30 trillion, right?
Yeah.
So there's just no way that this transformation happens without Bitcoin just massively going up. Now, it doesn't necessarily massively go up tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's all this resistance, and everybody, all the horse and buggy manufacturers did not like the car very well.
No, they did not.
They all thought it was a bad idea, and they should stop that thing.
Let me ask you a question about that, because this was an interesting point on the All In podcast that just posted on Friday. So David Friedberg was talking about they were talking about Bitcoin, and David Friedberg's point was Donald Trump just came out very heavily against any nation, the BRICS nations, trying to replace the dollar, saying he was going to levy massive tariffs against any of those nations. Yet out the other side of his mouth, he is speaking positively about Bitcoin and saying maybe there won't be taxes on Bitcoin and supporting it. Doesn't Bitcoin compete with the dollar. And why would he view that any differently than a BRICS nation trying to replace the dollar?
Well, he might if the U.S. started buying a lot of Bitcoin. Because if the U.S. starts buying a lot of Bitcoin for its own private reserve, that makes the dollar more valuable.
Okay.
What do you prefer? The euro backed with no Bitcoin and a bunch of gold, which is kind of on its way out? Or do you prefer the U.S. with this new growing Bitcoin reserve that they're buying at the bargain based price of $97,000?
Yes.
You prefer the U.S., right?
Yeah. So basically you're saying they're not in conflict. The idea is to create
They're
a Bitcoin
not in
reserve.
conflict. They are in conflict if you start demonizing Bitcoin, right?
Yep.
If Bitcoin takes off and you demonize it, you got a problem. If Bitcoin takes up and you accept it and you build on it, on the contrary, it strengthens the dollar.
You bend like a reed in the wind.
Exactly.
Thereby creating more reeds. Yeah.
Be like the wind, as Bruce Lee would say,
Yeah, that's from Dune, actually, but yes.
Dune, yeah. Well, Bruce Lee said something
Dune and Bruce
similar.
Lee are sort of similar.
No, he's like, be like water,
Be like water, yeah. Well,
look, there's change happening. This is a better way to communicate value. It's inevitable. There's no other cryptocurrency that's going to fill this role. It's just like when gold took over from silver, it wasn't like, let's maybe use tin, let's use palladium. No, it was gold, Yeah. And here, it's not going to be Solana, it's not going to be Ethereum, like the reference currency is going to be Bitcoin. Not to say that those things won't exist.
Yeah.
But the reference currency is going to be Bitcoin. That's going to be the reference. And, if you start accepting that standpoint that we are headed into a Bitcoin world, then, I think what Saylor's doing is actually really brilliant, because, he is likely to become one of the wealthiest individuals, if not the wealthiest. Look, Elon Musk was sort of a guy in trouble at one point, with Tesla.
Yeah.
Like this thing's going to go bust. I've got, 6 months of runway unless the government bails me out and blah, blah, blah. Right.
It was weeks. He had weeks.
Yeah, now he's the world's richest man. Right.
Yeah.
So change can happen pretty quick.
Yes.
And I would say with Michael Saylor, if what we're just discussing happens in the next 5 years, he's going to just be in this unbelievable position.
Yeah.
And furthermore, I do not know what kind of yield will be available in 5 years from MicroStrategy, what they're going to do, but it's not going to be zero because they're going to have all the Bitcoin. They're going to have 2 or 3%. They have 2% now. They might have 4 or 5% of the world's Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
So, having that much Bitcoin means that they can lend it out. They can do all kinds of stuff with it, right?
Yeah.
They can earn a yield on it. And anybody who doesn't have this Bitcoin is going to have this problem of measuring themselves in Bitcoin. Everybody.
Yeah.
So I think, it's just sort of like you kind of have to scratch your head and say, yeah, these companies may be doing great in fiat terms. But if you start really looking at things in Bitcoin terms, you have to question it. And so, this could be, and I think guys like Jason are clearly still thinking in dollar terms,
Yeah. I mean, I think by his own admission, I think he would say the same thing.
Right. He would say, of course I measure my net worth in dollars, right? I don't measure my net worth in Bitcoin.
Yeah. No, of course not.
Right.
No, I think his thinking has evolved on the issue. I have to be fair to Jason. Right. But I do think that he doesn't believe in it the way you do, or I do even, or Saylor does.
Yeah.
He doesn't think it's a transformational reinvention of money, and we're all going to be, 10 years from now, we're all going to be thinking in sats. So I don't think he does believe that at this point.
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. And, look, I think the economic consequences of this are going to be profound because if we do go to this system, it's going to be a whole new class of people who have all the money. It's going to be a little bit like, when oil was discovered, very quickly, Rockefeller went from this little bookkeeper to the richest man in America by far. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Right.
within 15 years, right?
Yeah.
He went from owning having 1% of the U.S. GDP,
Yeah.
which he pretty much carried until the rest of his dying day, right?
Yes.
And he gave it all away and everything with Rockefeller Foundation and everything. But if you have these transformational things and you are ahead of the curve sufficiently, I think you could do amazing things. So I think he's probably going to be extremely successful. Now, I think that as a and I used to own some MicroStrategy. I owned these calls, but I sold them. I sold them actually almost near the top, just sort of randomly. Right?
So you didn't call the top. You're not saying you called the top.
No, I didn't call it at all. I just sort of said, I'm just going to sell it and buy Bitcoin with it. Because I had a really good profit in these calls. But now I'm I was going to do it today, but I just got busy with other stuff. But I'm probably going to take a little bit of a flyer with MSTR with a little bit, just like as a trade. But I feel like I should own it. And I do think that there's some chance that it does better than Bitcoin here.
Really?
Yeah.
How in the world would that be possible? Okay. How does MicroStrategy do better than
two multiplier? I think we could have an absolute. I think 2025 could be like 2017, right? That's kind of what I think, right?
Yep, I agree.
It just seems like everything's kind of happening at once, like the Trump administration's coming in, the Bitcoin reserve, the Saudis. I mean, I was reading today that the Russians are talking about possibly doing a Bitcoin reserve.
Yes.
So all this stuff is happening in 2025, right?
Yep.
So if this stuff actually materializes,
it's great for Bitcoin, but how does MicroStrategy become a better bet than Bitcoin?
Well, just because I think, unlike Bitcoin, right, I think the shares in MicroStrategy are even more in Saylor's control. He can completely determine how he rations those things off, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you're dealing with a much smaller market cap than Bitcoin. And I think the people who want to buy it have nothing else to buy.
Right.
So you're looking at now a $100 billion asset, right? They have nothing else to buy other than this $100 billion asset. And, if you've got $100 billion of new money who wants to go into that $100 billion asset, they're just going to bid up that multiple.
So basically it's an access issue. So the reason why MicroStrategy would do better is that there's a class of people for one reason or another can't get to Bitcoin proper.
So they can't get it, and there's a lot of them, right? So there's right now, let's just say there's $200 billion that comes into Bitcoin, right? Yep. That's a lot. That's a whole lot. There's a lot more than came in this year. I mean, this year we had between MicroStrategy and the ETFs, you probably had about $40 billion come in.
Yeah.
Okay, just in through those two things. Well, let's just say it goes from 40 to 200 at 5x next year, right?
Yeah.
Well, and let's just say it's split evenly between MicroStrategy and the ETFs. Well, the ETFs, they're going to put $100 billion, but into something that has a $2 billion market cap. But the other $100 billion that's going into MicroStrategy, that's going into something that has a $100 billion market cap.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So there's as scarce as Bitcoin is, MicroStrategy is more scarce, potentially in the super short term, right?
Yeah.
And there could be just this mountain. It's just, what is the size of the mountain of money that wants to get access to it, right?
Versus how small is the door.
And look, I think the mountain of money is very, very big. I think that's what everybody's underestimating, this mountain of money. And, I just don't think that we're really anywhere close to even starting. We're not even in we're in the warm up pitch. We might have thrown the first pitch.
And for
one
people
batter's out.
and for people who don't know, Fred, you are a seasoned Wall Street. You were one of the top traders on Wall Street in the 80s.
Yeah.
And you know that world extremely well. So just for people who don't know, Fred's not just almost out of
I know Wall Street, and I know Wall Street's very clever too. And Wall Street's going to come up with, look, Goldman Sachs is not going to want to sit this one out.
Yeah.
They really won't, And so they're going to try to fight like hell to get a seat at the table right now. Right now, up till now, Goldman is a bank, right? So after 2008, a lot of these brokerages became banks. So Morgan Stanley Merrill got bought by Bank of America, right? All these things got banking license, but which is good for them. They can do more. Like Goldman Sachs issues the Apple Card now, right?
Yeah,
it's a bank.
Yeah,
but the downside is they have reporting relationships. They have regulators now, banking regulators.
Yeah.
And those banking regulators have told them, under the guidance of Mrs. Elizabeth Warren, we do not want you to touch crypto.
Right. All the stuff we're seeing come out now that Mark Andreessen's been tweeting about, the debanking, the threatening letters, all
exactly.
that.
So all these entities, which are super imaginative, which have really deep pockets, and they're really experts at making money, they can't play.
Right, which is pissing them off, and now all of a sudden
pissing them off. And now, like, this guy Michael Saylor comes in, and somebody says, "Hey, you should do these at the money equity offerings." And he's like, "What? I should do what?" And it's like, "Oh no, just do this, do that, do this. We'll sell it for you. No problem." How about doing these convertible bonds? You did some senior debt, but I know that was really expensive. Let us show you this convertible bond. So we can place some of this stuff. We've got some insurance companies we can place this stuff to. But now, they're now working. Michael Saylor is working with Wall Street to get this product placed, right?
Yeah.
So, he's not like in it, but, these guys are all things are going to change. We're going to have 2025 could be that year. It may take one more year, but it's not going to take 10 more years, I don't think.
Yeah, it feels close to me as well. No, I think the other thing
it feels like we're hitting some kind of fulcrum point, where things just at some point you just get into this pure FOMO. And and for people that haven't been around as long as Mark and I just wanted to say, look, I've seen 3 of these bubbles now, like up close and personal, right? I saw the Japanese stock bubble in the late 1980s. I was there. I was in Japan many, many times. Spent months in Japan, trading, raising money. I ended up working for a U.S. brokerage firm that was owned by the Long-Term Credit Bank of Japan. Studied Japanese lessons, the whole thing.
That was the 80s, though, right? Like that was the hip thing to do. Yeah, everyone thought Japan was going to take over the world back then.
We all thought Japan was, and then you know what? It kind of died overnight.
Yeah,
that bubble.
It did.
But one thing happened in that bubble is every single person in Japan thought that this bubble was going to continue forever. Everybody there was like completely convinced, like we can make things 100 times better than the U.S. You guys are like out to lunch. We know how to do it better. We're going to do it. The next big bubble I saw was the .com bubble, right? You were in it, right?
I was part of that bubble.
And everybody then thought this time it's completely different, right?
Yep.
Everybody thought the internet changes everything.
Well, they were right. It just took some time
but what
to
I'm
catch
saying
up.
is nobody saw the crash.
Nobody saw the crash. I would agree with that.
Everybody was like moving from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, right?
Yep.
To get like some job.
Web van,
right? Exactly, right?
Yep, that was the vibe.
And the third one was the real estate bubble of 2007.
And 8. Yeah.
Right. I mean, just like everybody and their brother was like, you couldn't run into somebody at a party who wasn't like, "What do you do?" "I remodel houses. I'm working on 3 right now."
Yeah.
And everybody believes real estate's going up forever. Everybody, right?
Yep.
So all three of those bubble, the one thing it's taught me is that for you to get to a real bubble, everybody's got to be convinced of the same thing. And once we get to that 100% conviction level,
then we're in a bubble.
That's when we can just completely crash. Because at that point, everybody's leveraged up, everybody's completely convicted. And now if we go down just a little bit, it'll just blow everything up. Right?
Cascading liquidations, and everything destroys itself.
So I think and
Bitcoin is not there yet.
No, Bitcoin is not there. Like on a financial level, it's not, right? Mm-hmm. So, Bitcoin as a result, as it relates to its own little Bitcoin cycle and miners, like, yeah, sure, Bitcoin's had, but not Bitcoin as a financial asset. Like we're still at the point where there's all these Jason Calacanis who don't really believe in it.
Doubting Jasons,
right? We have a lot of people like that, right?
Yeah, we do. There's a lot of naysayers.
People, like CNBC, you turn it on.
My Facebook wall. Yeah, no, it's my Facebook wall.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of people like, weren't cryptocurrencies designed for criminals? Like there's still a lot of that floating around.
We saw it on 60 Minutes.
60 Minutes just this past week, yeah.
We just saw it. It's like this is like for drug trafficking and sex trafficking and terrorism, So we are not at the point where everybody and their brother wants to start a Bitcoin company and go. We are not there at all.
We are not there.
So I think in that sense, we're not at all in a bubble. We're in a bull market, but we're not in a bubble.
Yeah, there was one other little interesting thing I wanted to bring up too. So in the past week and a half or so, there have been two major gold finds. One in China, and I think that was something like 100 billion or so in new gold. And then there was one in El Salvador, which was reportedly 3 trillion.
Yeah.
That is like a lot of new gold.
You have to take that a little bit with a grain of salt because, a lot of this stuff, it might be, in theory, there's 3 trillion. But of course, if you want to get it out of the ground, it'll cost you 2 trillion. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and you need a road that's going to take 10 years to build. And
yeah. So it's not going to hit the market like tomorrow.
No.
But still, still pretty interesting that we're still there's still these gold finds. Like just the fact that it's happening at all. I mean, there's no new mountain of gold with Bitcoin. There's no new mountain with Bitcoin in it that's going to be found in China. Like that just can't happen. Right. So
no, it would be Bitcoin Cash or something like that.
Or if Craig Wright might be inside that mountain. But other than that.
Right. I mean, it's something else, but not Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So look, I don't know. I just think the supply demand are just insanely good. Of course it can go down. Of course it will go down and we'll consolidate and we move and everything. But the supply demand economics are so great that I just think that it's such a good trade to hold Bitcoin here. The only question you should have is how much do you want to own? That's it.
Yeah.
Not whether you should have it. You should have it. You should own it. And you should probably own it, just at a minimum for the next 10 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
even Jason owns it. So just
Yeah, he owns a little bit. But then the question is, how much should you own, right?
Yeah.
And, I think starting to measure your net worth in Bitcoins, I think that's kind of like shifts the paradigm a little bit, because you're no longer a billionaire. A billionaire is now somebody who owns 10,000 Bitcoin. That's what a billionaire is, right?
Yes. Let's redefine billionaire.
Let's redefine billionaire to be a 10,000 Bitcoiner.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting way. I mean, as you know, Fred, and we've discussed this, I do, most of my net worth is in Bitcoin, has always been in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So even though, as we both know, I like to shitcoin more, as you say. I like to explore things, as I like to say, in DeFi and elsewise. I don't play the frog coins, but I do play, Tau and things like that. So,
and look, I think you're playing them, but you're numerating your things in Bitcoin. You're kind of like
it's like I always think like how much Bitcoin did I do better versus Bitcoin than I would have done. That is in fact how I measure.
It's a totally logical way to look at things, But when a lot of these guys, the all-in crew, it's really, they're all talking about these stocks.
Yeah.
And, there may be a day of reckoning when people start realizing that, like if you right now in terms of the top ETFs, they're all crypto ETFs, all of them, like 9 out of the top 10.
Yeah.
Like the league tables now, it's like MSTR, MSTX, MSTU, IBIT, FBTC, BITO. Like you're looking at top performing things. So it's like, wait a second, crypto. India Growth Fund.
Yeah.
Like NVIDIA. So these people aren't stupid. They're going to see that for a year and they're going to be like, why is my portfolio not doing as well as these top 9 things out here?
Yeah. Then they'll come over.
They're going to come over. So I think things are imminent, I think. Look, I really wish Michael Saylor well. I think he's kind of the Elon Musk for our industry,
Mm-hmm.
And he's just a great. He's by far the best salesman of Bitcoin. I consider myself a pretty good one, but he's better. I mean,
I like your style. Honestly, I like your style better because it's more reasoned and sober. Yeah. And you're a PhD from Stanford. Like
I have different things.
You've got the Wall Street experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Saylor's, I mean, I like Saylor, but also I feel like he is a little bit wild-eyed, and I don't get the depth of discussion that I get from you. Put it that way. So.
Yeah. Well, look, I just think that we need more people who can articulate this thing well.
Yeah.
And so different visions are going to be great. And I think he's had more impact on orange pilling people than I think any other human being.
Well, that's true. And I think the simplicity, I think the way his simplicity, like it's sort of like Trump, right? Trump, the way he speaks is sort of dopey, right? But you need someone who can speak dopey to the masses. And I think Saylor, I don't think he's as considered and as deep as you in terms of the discussion, but I think it plays better. I think you're right. It does play better with a wider swath of people.
Look, we're super lucky to have him. Let me put it this way. There's a lot of other people who used to be very loud in the Bitcoin world, and I'm not going to name any names.
I know who you're thinking of.
Yeah. Well, sort of the previous couple generations ago of Bitcoin, like that's all we had. I mean, we didn't have the sailors back then,
That's true.
And so, and like Andreas is not speaking anymore. He was fantastic at the beginning, in 2013, 2014. But.
Yeah, but also Andreas was a brainiac, right? So like the brainy speak does not play with the mob. And,
That's right.
Rome is the sand of the Colosseum, not the marble of the Senate floor. We need the sand of the Colosseum people, right? That's Saylor. Saylor is good at that, right? So, yeah.
Exactly. So I think, but, I'm not a doomsdayer for MSTR. And I think if it gets much below 2, it could really go below 2 in MNAV. But if it gets below 2, you should start buying some. I just think it's a good thing to own, because I do think we're going to go much higher in Bitcoin. But the good news is you don't have to, because if you own Bitcoin, what he's doing is going to be so good for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You can just sit on the sidelines and cheer.
Yep.
Like a lot of people are like, Fred, you're not in MSTR, you're going to get wrecked. And I'm like,
who says that?
Let me check my bank account. Let me check my bank account. No, I'm not getting wrecked.
Yeah, I think you're pretty far away from being wrecked.
There's a lot. But all these people like, you're going to go get wrecked, boomer. Like, I'm like, well, maybe. Maybe, but we'll see.
Well, on that note, Fred, you've given us an hour of your time. Really appreciate it.
Mark. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you soon. Do I need to let it sit for recording or?